In the icy depths of Crystal Lake, where winter's grip tightened its hold on Wyoming's untamed wilderness, rancher Jake Sullivan stumbled upon a sight that shattered his heart: a lifeless Mustang Foal floating silently in the frigid waters. The tiny body seemed motionless, another casualty of nature's unforgiving cruelty. With heavy steps and an even heavier heart, Jake waded into the freezing lake to retrieve what he believed was a lost soul. But just as despair threatened to consume him, something miraculous happened. Something so unexpected it would defy logic and reignite hope not only for Jake, but for everyone who heard their story. Jake wasn't just rescuing a foal. He was confronting his own doubts about humanity's role in preserving the wild. This small creature, fragile yet fierce, became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, life can surprise us with its determination to survive. Together, they embarked on a journey that would challenge everything Jake thought he knew about trust, freedom, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. This tale will remind you that sometimes the smallest sparks ignite the brightest flames. It's a story of courage, second chances, and the transformative power of love. Through Jake's unwavering dedication and Phoenix's indomitable spirit, we are reminded that no challenge is insurmountable when met with compassion and hope. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more inspiring tales of courage, connection, and the wonders of the natural world. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into Jake and Phoenix's unforgettable journey, a testament to the power of resilience and redemption. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment of hope against all odds? Let us know in the comments below. When rancher Jake Sullivan spotted what looked like a lifeless Mustang Foal floating in Crystal Lake, his heart sank. The tiny body appeared motionless, another tragic victim of the harsh Wyoming wilderness. But as Jake waded into the freezing water to retrieve what he thought was a corpse, something absolutely shocking happened that would change both their lives forever. What started as a heartbreaking discovery became a miracle that defied all odds and proved that sometimes hope appears when we least expect it. This is a story of second chances, unbreakable bonds, and the incredible will to survive against impossible circumstances. The morning mist hung low over Crystal Lake as Jake Sullivan made his routine rounds across the Sullivan Ranch. The 42-year-old fourth-generation rancher had seen his share of nature's cruelties, but nothing had prepared him for the sight that awaited him at the lake's edge on that cold October morning. Through the gray dawn light, Jake spotted something unusual floating near the shore. His weathered hands tightened around his coffee mug as he squinted through the fog. What he saw made his stomach drop: the unmistakable form of a young Mustang Foal, seemingly lifeless, bobbing gently in the dark water. Jake's mind raced as he set down his mug and hurried toward the lake. The wild Mustang herds had been struggling through one of the harshest early winters in decades. Food was scarce, and the bitter cold had already claimed several adult horses from the local herds. But seeing a foal barely old enough to survive on its own was heartbreaking beyond words. The small body appeared to be that of a paint Mustang, with distinctive black and white markings that stood out starkly against the dark water. Jake estimated the foal couldn't have been more than 3 months old, far too young to have been separated from its mother under normal circumstances. As Jake approached the water's edge, his boots crunched on the frost-covered grass. The lake was shallow near the shore, but the water was numbingly cold. Without hesitation, he stepped into the icy water, his jeans immediately soaking through as he waded toward the motionless form. "Poor little guy," Jake whispered, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. He had planned to retrieve the body and give it a proper burial. It was the least he could do for the beautiful creature that had met such a tragic end. The water reached his knees as he drew closer to the foal. The small horse appeared peaceful, as if it had simply gone to sleep on the water's surface. Its coat, though wet, still showed the beautiful markings that would have made it a stunning adult Mustang. Jake reached out with gentle hands, prepared to lift the small body from the water. But as his fingers made contact with the foal's neck, something incredible happened. He felt it, the faintest flutter of a pulse beneath his fingertips. His heart nearly stopped. "No way," he breathed, leaning closer to examine the foal more carefully. The chest was barely moving, almost imperceptible, but there was definitely life still fighting within this tiny body. The foal's eyes remained closed, and its body was dangerously cold to the touch. But Jake now realized he wasn't looking at a corpse. He was witnessing a miracle. This little Mustang was clinging to life by the thinnest of threads, floating in a state that could only be described as suspended animation. Without wasting another second, Jake scooped the foal into his arms. The small horse was surprisingly light, its body limp and unresponsive. But the weak heartbeat against Jake's chest confirmed what seemed impossible. Against all odds, this little fighter was still alive. As Jake carried the unconscious foal toward shore, he knew the next few hours would determine whether this shocking discovery would become a story of miraculous rescue or heartbreaking loss. Jake's mind shifted into emergency mode as he carried the barely alive foal toward his ranch house. Every second counted, and the tiny Mustang's body temperature was dangerously low. The foal remained completely unresponsive, its breathing so shallow that Jake had to press his ear against its chest to confirm the heartbeat was still there. "Come on, little one, stay with me," Jake murmured as he quickened his pace across the frost-covered field. His wet jeans clung uncomfortably to his legs, but he barely noticed the cold. All his focus was on the fragile life in his arms. The morning mist hung low over Crystal Lake as Jake Sullivan made his routine rounds across the Sullivan Ranch. The 42-year-old fourth-generation rancher had seen his share of nature's cruelties, but nothing had prepared him for the sight that awaited him at the lake's edge on that cold October morning. Through the gray dawn light, Jake spotted something unusual floating near the shore. His weathered hands tightened around his coffee mug as he squinted through the fog. What he saw made his stomach drop. The unmistakable form of a young Mustang Foal, seemingly lifeless, bobbing gently in the dark water. Jake's mind raced as he set down his mug and hurried toward the lake. The wild Mustang herds had been struggling through one of the harshest early winters in decades. Food was scarce, and the bitter cold had already claimed several adult horses from the local herds. But seeing a foal barely old enough to survive on its own was heartbreaking beyond words. The small body appeared to be that of a paint Mustang, with distinctive black and white markings that stood out starkly against the dark water. Jake estimated the foal couldn't have been more than 3 months old, far too young to have been separated from its mother under normal circumstances. As Jake approached the water's edge, his boots crunched on the frost-covered grass. The lake was shallow near the shore, but the water was numbingly cold. Without hesitation, he stepped into the icy water, his jeans immediately soaking through as he waded toward the motionless form. "Poor little guy," Jake whispered, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. He had planned to retrieve the body and give it a proper burial. It was the least he could do for the beautiful creature that had met such a tragic end. The water reached his knees as he drew closer to the foal. The small horse appeared peaceful, as if it had simply gone to sleep on the water's surface. Its coat, though wet, still showed the beautiful markings that would have made it a stunning adult Mustang. Jake reached out with gentle hands, prepared to lift the small body from the water. But as his fingers made contact with the foal's neck, something incredible happened. He felt it, the faintest flutter of a pulse beneath his fingertips. His heart nearly stopped. "No way," he breathed, leaning closer to examine the foal more carefully. The chest was barely moving, almost imperceptible, but there was definitely life still fighting within this tiny body. The foal's eyes remained closed, and its body was dangerously cold to the touch. But Jake now realized he wasn't looking at a corpse. He was witnessing a miracle. This little Mustang was clinging to life by the thinnest of threads, floating in a state that could only be described as suspended animation. Without wasting another second, Jake scooped the foal into his arms. The small horse was surprisingly light, its body limp and unresponsive. But the weak heartbeat against Jake's chest confirmed what seemed impossible. Against all odds, this little fighter was still alive. As Jake carried the unconscious foal toward shore, he knew the next few hours would determine whether this shocking discovery would become a story of miraculous rescue or heartbreaking loss. Jake's mind shifted into emergency mode as he carried the barely alive foal toward his ranch house. Every second counted, and the tiny Mustang's body temperature was dangerously low. The foal remained completely unresponsive, its breathing so shallow that Jake had to press his ear against its chest to confirm the heartbeat was still there. "Come on, little one, stay with me," Jake murmured as he quickened his pace across the frost-covered field. His wet jeans clung uncomfortably to his legs, but he barely noticed the cold. All his focus was on the fragile life in his arms. The ranch house came into view, and Jake burst through the back door, startling his wife, Sarah, who was preparing breakfast in the kitchen. The 38-year-old former veterinary technician took one look at the limp foal in her husband's arms and immediately sprang into action. "Kitchen table now," Sarah commanded, sweeping dishes aside to make room. Her trained eyes quickly assessed the situation as Jake gently laid the foal down. "How long was it in the water?" "I don't know," Jake replied, his voice tight with worry. "Could have been hours, maybe all night, Sarah. I thought it was dead. It was just floating there like..." "Its pulse is weak but steady," Sarah interrupted, her fingers expertly checking vital signs. "Core temperature is critically low. We need to warm it gradually, or we could cause more damage." Sarah had assisted the local veterinarian for 8 years before retiring to focus on the ranch, and her medical knowledge was about to be put to the ultimate test. She grabbed towels from the linen closet and began gently drying the foal's coat, while Jake started a fire in the nearby fireplace. The foal, which they would later name Phoenix for its miraculous survival, showed no response to their ministrations. Its eyes remained closed, and its body stayed completely limp. The only signs of life were the faint heartbeat and barely perceptible breathing. "We need to call Dr. Martinez," Sarah said, referring to the local large animal veterinarian. "But in this weather, it'll take her at least an hour to get here through the back roads." Jake was already reaching for his phone when Sarah's voice stopped him. "Wait," she whispered, leaning closer to the foal. "Look at its nostrils." Jake peered down and saw what had caught Sarah's attention. The tiniest flutter of movement as the foal's breathing became slightly more pronounced. It was still unconscious, but something was changing. "The warming is helping," Sarah observed, continuing to massage the foal's legs to stimulate circulation. "But, Jake, even if we can stabilize it, this little one is going to need round-the-clock care. Foals separated from their mothers this young." She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew the challenges ahead would be immense. Without its mother's milk and protection, the foal would need constant feeding, warmth, and medical attention. Even then, survival wasn't guaranteed. But as Jake looked down at the small Mustang lying on their kitchen table, something stirred in his chest. This wasn't just any abandoned foal. This was a fighter who had somehow survived being submerged in freezing water. If Phoenix had the will to fight, Jake was determined to give it every chance to live. "Make the call," Jake said firmly. "And Sarah, start heating some goat's milk. We're going to save this little one." The foal's breathing grew slightly stronger as the warmth from the towels and nearby fire began to raise its body temperature. The miracle Jake had witnessed at the lake was just the beginning of an incredible journey that would test their limits and prove that sometimes love and determination can overcome even the most impossible odds. Dr. Elena Martinez arrived at the Sullivan Ranch 90 minutes later, her veterinary truck sliding slightly on the frost-covered driveway. The 45-year-old veterinarian had dealt with countless emergency calls throughout her 20-year career. But the story Jake had relayed over the phone was unlike anything she'd encountered. Phoenix lay on a makeshift bed of blankets near the fireplace, still unconscious, but showing subtle signs of improvement. The foal's breathing had become more regular, and its body temperature was slowly rising under the careful warming protocol Sarah had implemented. "Remarkable," Dr. Martinez whispered as she conducted her examination. "The hypothermia should have been fatal. Most animals submerged in water that cold for extended periods don't survive, especially not young foals. She drew blood samples and checked the foal's reflexes, documenting everything for what she suspected would become a medical case study. The heartbeat is strengthening, and I'm detecting slight muscle response to stimuli. Whatever happened in that lake, this little one's survival instincts are extraordinary. Jake paced nervously as Dr. Martinez worked. "Will Phoenix make it?" he asked, unable to keep the emotion from his voice. "Phoenix." Dr. Martinez smiled slightly. "Rising from apparent death. Fitting name. Honestly, Jake, the next 48 hours will be critical. If the foal regains consciousness and can take nourishment, there's hope. But even then, raising an orphan Mustang foal is incredibly challenging." Sarah had been researching foal care on her tablet throughout the morning. "I found a specialist mare's milk replacer formula," she reported, "and there are detailed feeding schedules for orphan foals. If Phoenix wakes up, we'll be ready." As if responding to its name, the foal's eyelids fluttered slightly. All three adults leaned closer, holding their breath. Phoenix's eyes opened for just a moment, revealing beautiful dark brown irises before closing again. But it was enough to send hope surging through the room. "That's the first conscious response," Dr. Martinez noted, making entries in her charts. "It's a very positive sign." Over the next 6 hours, Phoenix gradually emerged from its near-death state. The foal's first real awakening came as the sun was setting, painting the ranch house in golden light. Jake was sitting beside the makeshift bed when Phoenix suddenly lifted its head, looking around with confused but alert eyes. "Sarah, Dr. Martinez," Jake called out. "Phoenix is awake." The foal attempted to stand, its long legs unsteady and trembling. Jake gently supported the small Mustang as it struggled to find its balance. Phoenix was weak but determined, and after several attempts, managed to stand on shaky legs. "Now comes the real test," Dr. Martinez said, preparing a bottle of warm milk replacer. "If Phoenix won't take the bottle, we'll have to use a feeding tube, which adds complications." Sarah approached slowly with the bottle, speaking in soothing tones. "Come on, baby. You need to eat to get strong." Phoenix sniffed the bottle curiously, its natural instincts warring with confusion. The foal had never encountered anything like this artificial nipple, and its survival depended on accepting this substitute for its mother's milk. For several tense minutes, Phoenix rejected the bottle, turning its head away and whickering softly. Jake's heart sank as he watched the foal refuse the life-giving nutrition it desperately needed. Then, as if making a conscious decision to trust these strange humans who had saved its life, Phoenix tentatively took the nipple in its mouth and began to suck. The warm milk flowed, and the foal's survival instincts took over completely. "Yes," Sarah exclaimed quietly, tears streaming down her face as Phoenix drank hungrily. Dr. Martinez smiled broadly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have ourselves a miracle. This little Mustang isn't just going to survive, it's going to thrive." But even as they celebrated this crucial victory, none of them could anticipate the challenges that lay ahead or the extraordinary bond that would develop between Jake and the wild foal he'd saved from the depths of Crystal Lake. 3 weeks had passed since Phoenix's miraculous rescue, and the young Mustang had defied every expectation. Under Jake and Sarah's devoted care, the foal had grown stronger each day, its coat developing a lustrous shine and its eyes sparkling with increasing curiosity about the world around it. However, Phoenix's wild Mustang heritage was becoming more apparent with each passing day. Unlike domestic foals, Phoenix possessed an untamed spirit that made traditional training methods ineffective. The young horse was intelligent and alert, but also fiercely independent and naturally wary of confinement. Jake discovered this firsthand when he attempted to lead Phoenix into the barn one evening. The foal, now strong enough to move with surprising speed and agility, reared up and pulled away from the lead rope, its eyes showing a flash of the wild freedom that ran through its bloodline. "Easy, Phoenix," Jake said calmly, approaching with open hands. "I'm not trying to cage you, buddy." Sarah watched from the barn doorway, recognizing the challenge they were facing. "Jake, This isn't a domestic horse we're dealing with. Phoenix's instincts are telling it that enclosed spaces mean danger. The situation became more complex when Dr. Martinez returned for a follow-up examination and brought concerning news. "I've been in contact with the Bureau of Land Management," she explained. "They've been tracking the local Mustang herds, and Phoenix's mother was likely part of a group that was scattered during a severe storm 3 weeks ago." Jake's heart sank as he realized the implication. "You're saying Phoenix might have family out there?" "It's possible, but Jake, there's something else you need to know. The BLM is planning a roundup of the scattered Mustangs next month. Any wild horses found on public land will be captured and taken to holding facilities." The news hit Jake like a physical blow. Phoenix had survived against impossible odds, only to potentially face life in a government holding pen, a fate that often meant a slow death for wild Mustangs who couldn't adapt to captivity. That night, Jake sat with Phoenix under the stars, the young Mustang grazing peacefully beside him. The foal had learned to trust Jake completely, often following him around the ranch like a loyal dog. But Jake could see the wildness in Phoenix's eyes when it gazed toward the distant mountains where its heritage lay. "What am I supposed to do with you, little one?" Jake murmured, gently stroking Phoenix's neck. "You're not meant for a life behind fences, but out there." As if sensing Jake's inner turmoil, Phoenix nuzzled against his shoulder, a gesture of affection that had become their nightly ritual. The bond between them had grown stronger than Jake had ever imagined possible, but he knew that love sometimes meant making difficult choices. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Maria Santos, a local Mustang advocate and trainer, arrived at the ranch after hearing about Phoenix's story from Dr. Martinez. The 52-year-old woman had spent her life working with wild horses and immediately recognized the unique challenges Jake was facing. "That's a special horse you've got there," Maria observed, watching Phoenix move with the natural grace of its wild ancestors. "But Jake, keeping a Mustang contained goes against everything in their nature. Phoenix needs to learn to be wild again, or will never truly be free." Jake felt torn between his growing love for Phoenix and the knowledge that Maria was right. "How do I teach a foal to be wild when it's only known human care?" Maria smiled, very carefully and with a lot of patience. "But first, we need to make sure Phoenix survives what's coming. The BLM roundup is scheduled for next month, and if they catch Phoenix, this story ends badly." As Jake looked at Phoenix playing in the morning sunlight, he realized he was facing the most difficult decision of his life. How do you prepare someone you love for a world that might destroy them? And how do you find the strength to let them go when every instinct tells you to hold on tight? The November wind cut across the Sullivan Ranch with an ominous chill as Jake watched Phoenix gallop freely across the pasture. In the 6 weeks since the rescue, the young Mustang had grown remarkably, its legs longer and stronger, its movements displaying the natural grace of its wild heritage. But with each passing day, Jake's heart grew heavier with the knowledge of what was coming. Maria Santos had been visiting the ranch 3 times a week, working with Phoenix on what she called rewilding training. The process was unlike anything Jake had ever witnessed. Maria wasn't teaching Phoenix to be tame, but rather helping the young Mustang remember instincts that should have been learned from its mother. Wild Mustangs survive through wariness, Maria explained as they watched Phoenix practice the alert postures she'd been teaching. Phoenix needs to learn to be suspicious of humans again, even though it goes against every bond you've built. The cruel irony wasn't lost on Jake. To save Phoenix's life, he had to teach it not to trust him. Dr. Martinez arrived with devastating news on a gray Thursday morning. "The BLM roundup has been moved up," she announced grimly. "They'll be here next week. Jake, if they find Phoenix on your property, they'll classify it as a captured wild horse. You'll lose any legal claim, and Phoenix will go straight to the holding facilities." Sarah stepped closer to Jake, taking his hand. "There has to be something we can do, some legal protection." "I've researched every option," Dr. Martinez replied. "Phoenix is too young to have been part of any protected herd documentation. Legally, it's an orphaned wild Mustang, which makes it government property." That evening, Jake made the most difficult decision of his life. He called Maria and asked her to accelerate Phoenix's rewilding training. How long before Phoenix could survive on its own? Maria was quiet for a long moment. Jake, Phoenix is strong and intelligent, but it's still young. Ideally, a Mustang Foal would stay with its mother for at least a year. We're talking about sending a 6-month-old into one of the harshest winters on record. But could it survive? Maybe. With luck and everything going right, maybe. But Jake, once Phoenix goes wild, there's no calling it back. If it gets injured or sick out there, you'll never know. Are you prepared for that? Jake looked out at Phoenix, who was standing by the fence watching him with trusting eyes. The foal nickered softly when it saw Jake, expecting their usual evening treats and affection. I don't have a choice, Maria. A slim chance at freedom is better than certain death in a holding pen. The next morning, Jake began the heartbreaking process of teaching Phoenix to fear humans, using techniques Maria had shown him. He started approaching the foal with intentionally threatening gestures, making loud noises, and creating negative associations with human contact. Phoenix's confusion was heartbreaking to witness. The young Mustang would approach Jake with its usual trust, only to be met with rejection and intimidation. By the third day, Phoenix had stopped trying to nuzzle Jake's shoulder and instead kept a wary distance. "It's working," Maria observed, though her voice carried no satisfaction. "Phoenix is starting to exhibit natural flight responses. But Jake, this is going to be the hardest part for you. Once we release Phoenix, you can never go back to the way things were." As the BLM roundup approached, Jake spent sleepless nights watching Phoenix from his bedroom window. The young Mustang was adapting to its new reality, becoming more alert and skittish with each passing day. But Jake could see the hurt and confusion in those dark eyes, and it was tearing him apart. On the final night before the planned release, Jake violated all of Maria's training protocols. He went to Phoenix one last time, offering the gentle touch and soft words that had characterized their bond from the beginning. Phoenix hesitated, its new weariness warring with the deep connection they'd shared. Finally, the young Mustang approached and rested its head against Jake's chest, just as it had during those first fragile days of recovery. "I'm so sorry, Phoenix," Jake whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I love you too much to let them cage you. You were meant to run free." Tomorrow, he would open the gates and watch Phoenix disappear into the wild, hoping that love could give a young Mustang the strength to survive in a world that offered no guarantees. The morning of Phoenix's release dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow dusting the distant mountains where the wild Mustang herds roamed. Jake stood at the pasture gate, his hands trembling as he prepared to open it for the last time. Maria Santos waited nearby, ready to help guide Phoenix toward the path that would lead to the open range. "Remember," Maria said quietly, "once Phoenix leaves, you can't follow. You can't check on it. And you can't try to help if you see it struggling. The only way this works is if you let go completely." Sarah stood on the ranch house porch, tears streaming down her face as she watched the scene unfold. Dr. Martinez had positioned herself with binoculars to document Phoenix's departure for her research files. Though everyone knew this was about much more than scientific observation. Phoenix stood in the center of the pasture, its dark eyes alert and cautious. The young Mustang had grown magnificently over the past weeks, its coat thick and glossy, its legs strong and sure. The rewilding training had awakened instincts that now made it wary of human approach. But Jake could still see recognition in those intelligent eyes. "Okay, Phoenix," Jake whispered, his voice breaking. "This is it. This is your chance to be what you were meant to be." He opened the gate and stepped back, his heart pounding as Phoenix immediately noticed the change. The young Mustang approached the opening cautiously, sniffing the air that carried scents from the wild country beyond the ranch boundaries. For a moment, Phoenix hesitated at the threshold, looking back at Jake with an expression that seemed to hold both gratitude and goodbye. Then, as if making a conscious decision, the Mustang stepped through the gate and onto the path that led to freedom. Jake watched as Phoenix began to trot, then canter, then break into a full gallop across the open meadow. The young horse moved with a grace and power that took his breath away, every stride carrying it further from safety and deeper into the uncertain world of the wild. "Look," Maria breathed, pointing toward a distant ridge. Through her binoculars, Dr. Martinez could see what had caught Maria's attention. There's a small herd on the northern ridge. 3 mares and a yearling. Phoenix is heading straight for them. Jake's heart pounded as he watched Phoenix approach the wild horses. This was the moment of truth. Would the herd accept an orphaned foal that had been raised by humans? The lead mare raised her head, alert to Phoenix's approach. For several tense minutes, the horses evaluated each other across the distance. Then, in a gesture that brought tears to everyone's eyes, one of the mares nickered softly and moved toward Phoenix. "She's accepting him," Dr. Martinez reported, her voice filled with wonder. "The mare is letting Phoenix approach the herd." Jake watched through tears as Phoenix was welcomed into the small Mustang family. The young horse that had nearly died in Crystal Lake was now running free with its own kind, exactly as nature had intended. 3 days later, the BLM roundup began, but they found no trace of Phoenix or the small herd that had adopted him. The Mustangs had disappeared into the vast wilderness, safe from capture and free to live as their ancestors had for generations. Jake never saw Phoenix again, though he often found himself scanning the distant ridges with binoculars, hoping for a glimpse of the horse he'd saved and loved enough to let go. Maria assured him that Phoenix's survival training had been excellent and that the young Mustang had the best possible chance of thriving in the wild. On quiet evenings, Jake would walk down to Crystal Lake, where it all began. Sometimes, just sometimes, he could swear he heard the sound of hoofbeats in the distance, carried on the wind like a message of gratitude from a wild heart that had never forgotten the man who had given it a second chance at life. Phoenix had taught Jake that true love wasn't about holding on. It was about having the courage to let go when freedom mattered more than comfort. And in the vast wilderness of Wyoming, a young Mustang ran free, carrying with it the love and sacrifice of the rancher who had pulled it from the depths and shown it that miracles were possible when hope refused to die. Phoenix's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest acts of love require the deepest sacrifices. Jake's decision to rescue a dying foal from Crystal Lake began as an act of compassion, but his choice to release Phoenix into the wild became an act of true love. In a world where we often try to hold on to what we care about, Jake showed us that sometimes loving something means giving it the freedom to be what it was meant to be, even when it breaks our hearts. The bond between Jake and Phoenix proves that connections formed in moments of crisis can transcend species and time. Though they were separated by necessity, the love and care Jake provided during Phoenix's most vulnerable time gave the young Mustang the strength and confidence needed to thrive in the wild. This story is a powerful reminder that love and respect can bridge even the widest gaps, if we're willing to take the first step. Whether it's rescuing a stranded foal or simply showing compassion to those who need it most, these acts of kindness teach us that freedom is a gift worth fighting for. If this tale touched your heart, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of hope, resilience, and the incredible bonds between humans and animals. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that even in the fiercest storms, there's always a chance for renewal. And let us know in the comments, what lesson did you take away from Jake and Phoenix's journey? Thank you for joining us today. And remember, sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in silence.